Hello, and welcome to video lesson 5. Today we're going to be talking about carbohydrates. And by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to define organic versus inorganic, carbohydrate, and identify 3 key functions of carbohydrates, as well as define, recognize, and draw 7 key carbohydrates, including monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. And in particular, you should be familiar with glucose, maltose, and all of starch, cellulose, and glycogen. We will be doing the first 3 in part 1 of the video, which is mandatory, and then the last part in part 2 of the video, which is optional, because we will be doing this part in class. So to begin with, just a quick reminder. Of what organic versus inorganic is. In terms of organic molecules contain both carbon and hydrogen, whereas inorganic have either carbon or hydrogen or none of carbon or hydrogen. Something like, for example, CO2 is inorganic because it only has carbon. H2O is inorganic because it only has hydrogen. Or something like NaCl is inorganic because it has neither carbon nor hydrogen. This is important because a carbohydrate, for one, is an organic molecule. Meaning it has carbon plus hydrogen. In fact, carbohydrate really just means it is a hydrate. And if you think of hydrate, what does that make you think of? Give you a sec. That's right. It's water. It's a hydrate of carbon. Well, what do I mean by that? What it means is the ratio of hydrogen to oxygen atoms is just like that in water. It's always 2 hydrogens to 1 oxygen within a carbohydrate. And then we just throw in some carbons. So if you look at the empirical formula of a carbohydrate, right? That's a weird word, empirical formula. What empirical formula means is basically it's the generic formula showing the ratio of atoms. So the empirical formula for carbohydrates, no matter what carbohydrate you are, will always take on the form of C. You'll have some carbons. How many can vary, so we put CY. And then you'll have hydrogens, Again, the number can vary, but we'll say it's 2N, and then you have some oxygens, and now this number will depend on your number of hydrogens. It'll be simply N, 2 hydrogens to every oxygen. So if you see a formula that has twice the number of hydrogens to oxygens, you know, and then some carbons thrown in, you know you probably have a carbohydrate. Oh, carbohydrates have sort of 3 main classes that we'll be looking at. You have your monosaccharides, mono meaning how many? That's right, it's 1. Saccharides means a sugar, but it's a special sugar. It's formed in a ring, so it has 1 sugar ring, and by ring I mean the shape the atoms take is like a ring. The most common monosaccharide we'll be working with is glucose, which has the formula C6H12. How many oxygens must it have if there's 12 hydrogens? That's right, half as many, 6. Then we have, instead of 1 ring, 2 rings, so not mono, but disaccharides. So di referring to 2, saccharides referring to sugar ring. And finally, we have not 2 rings, but many rings. The prefix for many, that's right, it's polysaccharides. Poly for many, and finally saccharides for sugar ring. I guess we should make that plural, and we should go back and make that plural. Okay. If you look at food packages, sometimes you will come across the words monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Well, if we're considering learning about carbohydrates, it's because they have a very important function in our body. We're going to learn about the structure because structure is always going to influence what something can do. In this case, the 3 key functions of carbohydrates include, first off, short to medium term energy storage. Within the bonds of carbohydrates are energy that our body can access and use. So it's short to medium term because we can access the energy in the chemical bonds relatively easily. It's not too hard for our body to break it down. This is why athletes tend to carboload before events. And perhaps the most important is that glucose is readily converted to ATP, a molecule we're going to have another little video on, which is the energy currency of the cell. So carbohydrates are like walking into a dollar store with $100 bill, which is kind of difficult to spend, and maybe the dollar store says, no, we won't give you change for the $100 bill, as opposed to walking in with ATP, which is more like walking in with a bunch of toonies or something, which they're more happy for you to spend. It's easier to spend. Second function of carbohydrates are structural purposes. They actually help build and hold things together. This is more evident. It's evident in the human body, but much more evident in plants. In particular, you have things like cellulose, which is a polysaccharide, which essentially acts like support beams to hold the plant up. This is a really stringy stuff you find in something like celery. Okay. And finally, carbohydrates are involved in what's called cell recognition molecules in our body. What happens is we have chains of various carbohydrates attached to proteins that are on our cell surface. And when they're attached to the proteins, together the carbon proteins are called glycoproteins. Glyco referring to the carb portion, protein referring to the protein portion. And we all have glycoproteins that are unique to our body. So my glycoproteins will be different than your glycoproteins, which will be different than your classmates' glycoproteins. The only time they're likely to be similar is if you are genetically related. And these glycoproteins are really important because they mark our cells as self. And if someone else's glycoproteins enter our body, or bacteria glycoproteins enter our body and they're not like ours, we attack non-self glycoproteins. This is the primary reason that things like tissue transplants are rejected. You don't have a proper match on the glycoproteins. Okay, so that's where we're going to finish this part of the lesson. If you have any questions, ask me in class. Otherwise, I hope you have a good day. I'll see you in class.